video, we will examine the safety concerns of bicyclists using the roadway, and how the bicyclist's position on the roadway can dramatically increase or decrease the most common crash types. First, let's look at how the lane use concerns of a narrow vehicle driver differ from those of a car driver. The driver of a car or other wide vehicle has a built-in buffer, so the driver doesn't have to worry about other drivers encroaching on his lane. No driver expects to share the lane with another car driver, even one who is moving slowly. The driver of a narrow vehicle, such as a bicycle or motorcycle, has no built-in buffer, no cage extending beyond her body. Her vehicle only occupies a fraction of the lane width. Since the bicyclist is both narrower and slower than most traffic, other drivers expect to be able to use that extra lane width. Because they've never had to think about it, those drivers don't know when such a move poses a danger. So a defensive bicycle driver actively manages her lane space to avoid edge hazards, ensure good sight lines, and encourage safe passing behavior. Of course, motorist behavior is not uniform. Some motorists will always give a cyclist plenty of space. Some will give plenty of space if the adjacent lane is clear, but will squeeze by if it is occupied. Some will squeeze by, seemingly oblivious to the cyclist, unless the cyclist uses their position to actively discourage this behavior. The cyclist has no way to know what an approaching motorist will do, so the safest bet is to assume the last case. Riding at the edge and trusting others to always do the right thing is a failing strategy. Even when it does not lead to a crash, it often leads to an unnecessarily difficult and stressful trip. Now let's take a moment to see how much space a cyclist needs. Most roadway lanes are between 10 and 12 feet wide. Now let's see if it's possible to share that safely. A cyclist needs an operating width of at least 4 feet. They need a couple of feet of safe clearance from the hazards of the road edge itself. Most states recommend a minimum of 3 feet of passing clearance, either in their driver handbook or in their statutes. That is sufficient under mild conditions, but not with higher speeds and bigger vehicles. A 12-foot lane is barely shareable with one of the smallest cars on the road. With a mid-size SUV, the cyclist gets at most 2 feet of clearance. A lane that a cyclist could share with most mid-size cars would have to be at least 14 feet wide. But even with an average-sized pickup truck, 14 feet would be tight. With larger vehicles, the lane would have to be at least 16 feet wide. And with large commercial vehicles, such as buses and tractor-trailers, even that width is insufficient. Think of it this way. Car drivers, with their steel cages and airbags, can get 5 feet or more of passing clearance, even from large trucks. Shouldn't a cyclist, without those protections, get at least that much clearance? And many other factors come into play when determining how much road width a cyclist needs to operate safely. The quality of the pavement, parked cars, frequency of conflict points, sight obstructions, the kind of vehicles on the road, and the cyclist's speed, even what type of bike they're using. A cyclist can prevent most car-bike crashes, even those that would be the motorist's fault. Let's look at how lane position is a critical factor in all common crash types. We've already talked about passing clearance. The sideswipe is a crash that happens when the motorist doesn't clear the cyclist while trying to squeeze past. This is the most common type of overtaking crash. Many crash reports state the cause as motorist misjudged space. How does that happen? Well, someone who has never driven a two-wheeled vehicle has never had to think about how wide lanes are or how vehicles fit in them. When the cyclist rides at the edge, it can appear to the motorist that there is enough room to pass without changing lanes. When the cyclist narrows the space to their left, it becomes clear to the motorist that the lane change is necessary. Dooring is another hazard of riding too far right. The cyclist can prevent dooring by keeping at least 5 feet from parked cars. But once that 5-foot space is excluded, the remainder of the lane might be narrow enough to pose a sideswipe hazard. In that case, the cyclist should narrow the space to their left, just like they might do in any other narrow lane. Remember, that lane may be around 15 feet wide, but a third of it is unusable hazardous space. The next 3 crash types happen at intersections. Lane position is a critical factor in those too. The right hook. A motorist can underestimate a cyclist's speed when passing, and can fail to notice the cyclist is still alongside in their blind spot. If the motorist must change lanes to pass, they are more likely to wait and turn after the cyclist clears the intersection. Bike lanes do not mitigate this problem, so a cyclist might choose to leave the bike lane to avoid it. The left cross. A cyclist riding at the edge can appear to be moving more slowly than they really are. A motorist can also simply fail to notice a cyclist at the edge because the cyclist is outside of their primary focus area. Additionally, the left-turning motorist's view of the cyclist can be obstructed by vehicles passing the cyclist. This type of screening is most common with bike lanes and shoulders. A far left position makes the cyclist as prominent as possible and keeps sight lines clear. The drive out. Once again, a motorist can misjudge a cyclist's speed or can fail to notice a cyclist who is outside of their focus area. The motorist's view can also be blocked by things like shrubs, trees, walls, or parked cars, and the cyclist's view is equally compromised. By moving left, the cyclist becomes more noticeable and increases the time and distance to see and be seen. As with the other common types of crashes, bike lanes don't solve this problem. By keeping away from the edge, a cyclist is able to minimize danger from the sides and rear and focus on the road ahead. On a 2-lane road, where the lane is too narrow for a cyclist and a motorist to safely travel side by side, the motorist must ensure that the oncoming lane is clear before passing the cyclist. When they cannot do so immediately, either because the oncoming lane is occupied or because sight lines are short, there's a strong temptation to try to pass too close or to try to beat oncoming traffic. This poses a hazard to the cyclist, not to mention the oncoming driver. So when it is not safe, a defensive bicycle driver actively discourages passing, using their position in the lane and sometimes hand gestures as well. When it is safe, they can relax their vigilance a little and encourage motorists to pass. But they might not want to relax too much. On some roads, buzz passes are a problem even when the oncoming lane is clear. You might be thinking, but what if there's a solid yellow line? These lines are largely applied without regard to the variety of vehicles on the road and the wide range of speeds they can achieve. There are miles upon miles of solid yellow lines on straight, flat roads, where the sight lines are more than adequate for a motorist to pass a cyclist. On a multi-lane road, motorists have another lane to pass, but they have to yield to traffic in that lane before changing lanes. This is easiest when the motorist is traveling at the same speed as that other traffic. So it's easiest if the motorist changes lanes early before getting close enough to necessitate lane. When motorists recognize too late the need to change lanes, they often try to pass by straddling the lane line. These partial lane changes are prone to errors in perception and judgment, increasing the likelihood of buzz passes and the risk for sideswipe crashes. So a defensive bicycle driver chooses a position in the lane that encourages early, full lane changes. That prominent position is not only proven by experience, it is backed by research conducted in Southern California. Researchers found that as a cyclist moves away from the edge, passes initially got closer because motorists don't recognize the need to change lanes. Once the cyclist gets about 3 feet from the right edge of the lane, passing clearance begins to increase because the motorists are moving partially into the next lane. But this carries the risk of motorist judgment errors. Cyclists can find consistent full lane changes, the safest passes, somewhere between the center of the lane and the left tire track. We understand that it may look odd at first to see a bicyclist riding this way, but we hope you now understand that this is a proven way for bicyclists to prevent crashes.